Okay. What we're going to do is look on the machine how to install the different printers. To install a directly attached printer, is that a big deal for anybody?
Yeah.
It is?
No.
So we'll go to the control panel.
An HP printer.
Printers. An HP printer, most of them will find themselves, right?
Or they'll tell you that they can't find.
Devices and printers they can or can't find. One of the kind of good things and bad things about Microsoft, we add a local printer, LPT1, we can just tell it to install one. It's retrieving devices. If we want to tell it we got a Canon inkjet or whatever, just next, and it'll install it for you, whether it's actually there or not. It'll take it a minute to install in the printer, to do the drivers and all that other good stuff. And when we get this one, we can look at some of the how we're going to manage this thing. Probably make me a liar and won't actually put it on for me, right? So the location of this thing, we can put whatever we want. And then any kind of comments, we can share or not share the printer. If I share the printer, this machine just became a print server. If I share the printer, you still have to provide credentials when you go to install it. So I'm going to, let's go ahead and share it so that we can see what all of those permissions are, and we'll set it as the default printer. I'm not going to print a test page because it's not a real printer. So I now have this Canon down here. Properties, the hardware properties themselves are going to be a function of the device, and this one really didn't have a whole lot. See what's printing, if I have anything in the queue, is available there. If I had the ability to manage documents, I could pause them, I could change the priority of the devices that are in the queue here. And the printer itself, that is the default. Printing preferences, we get into here, these are going to be specific to the individual device. Grayscale printing, preview before printing, whatever you want to set in these things. There are a number of ways to get to these. We have documents, we have pause, resume, restart, cancel. The properties, if we had a document in here, the properties would allow us to move it up and down in the food chain here. When you go through those, the printer properties itself is got a number of tabs on it. The general, which is the stuff that I put room 11, should be 111. What we want to call it, the name of the device, when I said to share it, it picked up the same name. That's what users will see when they try to install that printer. Sharing, we shared it as this name. We could share it as the network printer or whatever we wanted to call it. Render jobs on client computers. The jobs get rendered on the local machines, which means that we really need to have the correct driver there. That takes some load off of the print server, that the print server really does become the traffic director at that point.
So, now if you had a machine, say you had a couple machines with different OSs or whatever.
Different machines, different OS is going to have different drivers that are compatible. That's where glad you asked that question, this little tab down here, additional drivers, where we can add the additional drivers for those other machines. When we add those additional drivers, we're really talking about other Windows machines.
Right.
Could be a 32-bit, could be a Windows 98, could be a Windows 95, could be a Windows XP driver. We can add those in there. And then the print server will deliver the correct driver to the device. So we can add additional drivers. That means that we got to have that driver. You can download them from the internet. You can use a CD, whatever you need to do that when we do those. The ports over here, we have the LPT, and we're going to modify the ports here in just a few minutes. We got to send to OneNote. Here's that Microsoft XPS document printer, which again, when you print it and when you install the operating system, you're going to get that. So you can always print to the XPS printer. If you have a situation, and we have occasionally out here for like the testing, where the printer doesn't get installed right or whatever else, and they try to print the results, it says, where do you want to save it? If you get the where do you want to save it, check to be sure that your print devices, your printer processes are actually where you expected them to be. The Advanced tab is the one that is the most interesting and the one that you will need to know how to configure next Thursday. In this one, we have a number of different options. One is, when is this printer, this process available? The default is always available. If we had multiple groups, like, and in the lab, in the activity, I ask you to make 3 groups, 3 processes. One's going to be the bosses, the workers, and then I got another one I call paper wasters. The bosses, you're probably going to let them have printing available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Do the workers need that? So you may limit them to some reasonable time, like maybe 7 till 6 or something, their shift, whatever their shift is, so that they're not doing things, so that when John goes home and figures out how to use Google Cloud printing to the printers here, that he can't print in the middle of the night, which has happened one time before, by the way. So we can limit when the different users, groups that have the authority to use this device, this process, and again, the whole process, can use the printer, can print to it. The other one down here is a priority 1. Sounds really good, right? Pri 1? Pri 1 is the lowest priority. 99 is the highest priority. So when you use these groups, the bosses, the paper wasters, and the workers, you need to assign priorities. A high priority would be 99. Not good, because if the boss's boss comes in, they may need a higher priority. What they generally recommend is that you take something like maybe a 20, 50, 80, something like that. It gives you some wiggle room on each side of everything for a low, medium, and high priority. But you can change that. 1 is the lowest priority. It's the default priority. So the default is the lowest. And what this would do is, if we have the multiple printers go into the single device, which is what you're going to do, then this would control which print job actually gets to the head of the line. The priorities here. The spool print documents, so the program finishes printing faster. Spool is going to save it to disk. Well, one of the things that I think, particularly with all of the internet stuff that we do, that the default, and this is just me, that the default is maybe not necessarily what you would want, is this one here that says start printing immediately. I would recommend that in a network environment that you start printing after the last page is spooled, so that the entire document has to be on disk before it actually starts doing the printing. Because if you start a print job, started immediately, and something happens and you lose connectivity, you know what happens to everybody else's print jobs? They just sit and wait for this one to finish, and this one can't finish, so now you've got to go do it in and do management. That's just me. That's the way that I would configure it if I had the choice about how to do that. And then we can also do the print directly to printer. Kind of risky, and I have seen that occasionally, because I do that occasionally, and sometimes you get your print jobs mixed in with everybody else's print jobs, because we have competing print servers now that aren't on the same machine. Or you're competing print servers, not competing printers. So that may or may not. Whole mismatched documents, if we have a driver mismatch, that's what that does. It doesn't give you the 673 sheets of paper with 1 character per page. The key printed documents, the default is to make them go away. If you have some reason to hold the documents, the files that people have printed, you can keep the printed documents there. If you do that, be aware that you can run out of disk space pretty quickly. So that's just one of those to be aware of. printing defaults, printer processors, or separator pages, they have that. They usually go through a whole bunch of separator pages. We used to use separated pages in NetWare, and our separator page had like your username on it, so that between everybody's job, you had a separator page. It just has your username on it, and the rest of it's blank. Waste paper, because what we found out was in the coursework, generally you print like one page in the coursework. Now, if you're doing papers and stuff like that, it's more obviously. So for everything that people were doing, all of those kinds of things, they were using 2 sheets of paper. So we took that away. But there is that ability. Color management, only if you have color management, that's going to be, again, something that's going to be hardware specific. Security, the default here you see is print to everyone. Everyone is basically anybody that can connect to it. Well, everyone is everyone, but what you're going to find out when you connect to the printer that's available for you to do the network printing, which we'll do here in just a second, you still have to log on. You have to provide credentials if you have security set up on the machine. It doesn't mean that anybody can walk in off the street and just install that printer. You still have to have the ability, the credentials to log on to that machine. But if you do that, then it is everyone. Creator owner, Skyline, which is this user, and then the administrators group on the Skyline Enterprise, which is the name of this machine, have the ability to do that. If I wanted to change that, I can take the everyone, remove the everyone group, and then add whichever groups, the paper wasters or the bosses or whoever I wanted to be in here in order to do that, so I can control access. If I take the everyone group out the way this is configured right now, the user Skyline can use this and the administrators group can use this. And that's it, because there's nobody else in the list creator owner, which is the Skyline kind of guy. How you put it back in? Same way you do every other one. We're going to add, and then in this one, if I go to advanced, by the way, permissions, I'm going to go back. When you do permissions, if you type part of the word in here and check names, it'll find it for you. I don't have any other groups created on this one. But we could go in here and go to advanced. If I didn't know my groups, I could find now, and it'll give me a list of groups. So we could go out here and let's say that we want authenticated users to be able to do that. Okay, authenticated users, the default is print. Manage this printer, manage documents are the other 2 permissions that are available here. I've now allowed anybody that's authenticated users to use this printer, which is a little bit different than everyone, but honestly not a whole lot. They've changed some of the authorities here. Maintenance, this again is going to be the hardware specific, what you can do, clean the head, all those kinds of things, the cleaning, the deep cleaning, those sorts of things. So, pretty straightforward process. The advanced, again, something that next Thursday you'll need to know how to do. How do you manage these things? The advanced is basically it, and permissions. Say again?
Did we ever mess with the ink level control?
Do we ever mess with the ink level? Now, the only thing it really tells you is what the ink level is.
So it doesn't allow you to say, no, only use 25% of this color?
That's, again, a function of the device itself, and I don't see anything in this one. The printers that we have over here in the default, the one at least that we use, and I think the one in the library is the same way, allows you to use something that doesn't use a full charge. Okay. Best word that I can think. That you use reduced.
What is that one there? It says ink usage control.
Well, that probably is it then. Ink usage control. Say black. Use composite black. Intermediate measure. Composite black is a really expensive way to make black ink because you use your color cartridge, and you get a kind of a gray. So, yeah. So yeah, that sort of functionality is going to be a function of the print device that you buy. So that is a local printer. If I wanted to install a network printer, we can go back up here and do the add printer, add a network printer, wired, Bluetooth or wireless or whatever else. And it's probably not going to find a whole lot, because basically what it's going to be looking for is something that is in Active Directory. And it's still searching, still searching, still searching. I'm just going to go ahead down here and say the printer I want isn't listed, because I don't think it's going to find one. Select a printer share. I could browse for a printer. I think INSTRPC maybe is one that's out there. INSTRPC, so we have one here. It's asking for credentials. When you do this activity, that's going to be the one that you're going to install it on. It's, can you guess the credentials? And password 1. And the share is Lab Network Printer. So we can install this network printer. When I do that, I'm going to be controlling, or I would have controlled, who could see this printer, who could use this printer from the print server that it's running on, not from the machine that I installed it to locally. So I can install the driver. The driver is coming from the print server, the device that it's shared on. INSTRPC, it's in the activity sheet, but you need to get a new activity sheet if you already got that one. So I now have one here. It's Lab Network Printer. This actually is a real one that we'll print in the library. The other add printer that I'd like for you to know about, and I think that Microsoft wants you to know about, is we're going to add a local printer. This goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. We're going to create a new port. You can create a local port, and the local ports are really designed if you have a printer that goes down and you need to print to a different physical device. You can use a port on the machine where it went down to send it to a different physical device. But what we're going to use is a standard TCP/IP port, and the TCP/IP port 10.60.64.20 should be the device that we use here. And HP LaserJet P40, this one right here, PCL6, is the print name. This, by the way, is the one that's in the library, installing the printer. And with any luck, it's going to communicate with and it'll find the correct driver in Windows. So this one says, and we'll put in the location, we'll say library. Next, set it as the default printer. This one actually will print a test page. I'm not going to do it. I have asked you guys to do that. These are, and I've now changed the default printer, so to install it to an IP address, if you have one of those devices at home that plugs directly into your network and you don't want to have the print server, the machine that you've shared it out on, you can install it via an IP address by using that process. So we can manage who, we can manage when, and depending on the device, how much ink or toner that the device uses. You can turn off the color, for instance, things like that. And whatever you configured on the print server is what's going to be delivered to your users. Toner save mode, that's the one I was trying to think of earlier. They put, I think, all the printers in toner save mode so that they would be there. If we wanted to put a second one, if we wanted to configure this thing, printer properties, in here, kind of like what I said, the sharing here, let's share this one as the bosses. And we would go into the advanced tab, and what kind of priority would you give the bosses?
80.
Maybe like an 80, okay. We're not going to change the driver. This is the one that you can't get in trouble to. You can change the driver here. Not going to do that. And again, my preference is start printing after the last page is spooled, and I probably would hold the mismatched documents just in case somebody goes back and does change that thing. We're going to allow them to always print, right? So we wouldn't need to change that time. When we went to our workers, we might change that to 6 to 6 or whatever else. Not a whole lot of things that we're going to manage here, but they would be always available. And the driver here, I go back to the general page, if I can get back to it. And this one I would say bosses too. So it shows up as a share as bosses as well as in the local it's going to be bosses. I would also need to go in and configure the security on this, wouldn't I? A shared printer you renamed the existing connections. The printer from the other computers will break if they've already installed it, but hopefully we haven't. We would go in here and remove the everyone group and add the group that we haven't made yet called bosses that had the bosses in it. And we would give them print. Do you really want them managing your printers? Probably not. What you're going to find, I think, and one of my favorite questions is, what kind of permissions are you going to give whoever your bosses are, whoever the CEO is? How much permission you're going to give them? People, I'm going to give them access to everything. You don't give them access to anything.
I like to stick it to the man.
Well, you don't like sticking to the man, but, you know, if you give them the authority, you know what? That's what they'll do. So you really need to be careful about what kind of authority you give to people. Well, we had, years ago, a director of education who decided that she should be an administrator on the network. You know how dangerous that is? There are a lot of companies out there that have decided that everybody in the company should be an administrator, or at least of their own computer. You know how dangerous that is? That's really dangerous, because now you're an administrator, you can do all that bad stuff like install viruses, which you might not be able to do if you can't elevate the privileges. So be careful of those things. But does managing, and you have an activity in this chapter to do this, to basically go through this process again. And then you'll probably get to go through this process again next Thursday when you do the second half of the last test in this course. But what are you going to do one step at a time? We're going to manage it, the properties, the printer properties. Most of the management actually takes place in the advanced tab. That's where you do the time and the priorities, and those sorts of things are available there. So we've gone through installing a local printer that would be wired to. LPT1 is the one, I just took the default. One that, what I would say, is directly connected using an IP address, because when we went through that, we installed a local printer, not a network printer. And then we installed a network printer. The network printer was shared from another device. The other way that you can do that, we can do the add printer. I like to take shortcuts. INSTRPC, right? // INSTRPC. And, well, this one, we shared this. I changed this to bosses, so we have a bosses shared here. I didn't get to where I thought I was going to get, did I? So you can do it at the run line with the / computer name, share name, and get to the resources just like you can with any other shared resource, or you can add it through the printers itself, through the print devices itself. Are there questions about installing those things?
Yeah, how do you do it?